The doctor's hand was already reaching for the switch. 6 months. That's how long Eli Crow had been lying there breathing because a machine told him to alive because no one had pulled the plug. Yet. And now someone finally was going to. But a 24-year-old rookie nurse with shaking hands and a gut screaming at her to stop stepped directly into the doorway and said 5 words that changed everything. Doctor, his pupils just moved. Nobody believed her. They should have. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The paperwork was already done. That was the thing that hit Claire Bennett the hardest when she first read Eli Crow's chart. Not the diagnosis, not the accident report, not even the 6 months of clinical notes stacked in a manila folder thicker than her forearm. It was the last page, the one with the signatures, the one that had already been signed by 3 separate neurologists, 2 attending physicians, and the hospital's ethics board. Recommendation withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment. Data procedure, Friday 9 a.m. Friday was in 36 hours. Claire stood at the nurse's station at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, holding that folder, like it was something that might explode, and she read the last page 3 times. Then she set the folder down very carefully, like she was afraid of it. And then she picked it up again. "You're the new one, right?" She turned. Donna Marsh, the charge nurse, a woman who had been working the ICU at Blackstone Medical Center for longer than Claire had been alive, was watching her from behind a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold an hour ago. Donna had the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. "Yes, ma'am," Claire said. "Claire Bennett. I started Monday." "I know who you are." Donna nodded at the folder. "You're reading Crow. I was assigned to his room tonight." "Yeah." Donna took a slow sip of her cold coffee. "Lucky you." Claire looked back at the folder. "Has anyone tried everything?" Donna's voice wasn't cruel. That was the part that stung. It was just tired. "Every test, every protocol, every specialist who'd take the case. His GCS hasn't moved in 4 months. He's a 2, Claire. He's been a 2 since October." A Glasgow Coma Scale score of 2 meant almost nothing. It meant a body performing the minimum biological functions required to keep a heart beating. It did not mean a person. It did not mean someone coming back. Claire knew all of that. She also knew that she'd been watching Eli Crow's vitals on the monitor from the hallway for the last 20 minutes, and something wasn't sitting right. "His heart rate," she said. Donna raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" It dipped when the orderly came in at 11:15, just for about 4 seconds. It went from 61 down to 57 and then back up. Patients' heart rates fluctuate, you know that. And then it dipped again when the orderly left, went back down to 57 for almost the same amount of time. Claire paused, like it was reacting. Donna was quiet for a moment, then she set her coffee down. "Claire, I know how it sounds. It sounds like you're a 3-day-old nurse who read too many comeback stories on the internet. I had 4 years in the Army before nursing school," Claire said, and she kept her voice even. "Field medic, 2 deployments. I've seen people who looked exactly like what everyone said Eli Crow looks like, and I've seen some of them come back." Donna looked at her for a long moment, not unkindly, but not hopefully either. The neurologist signed off. The ethics board signed off. His mother, God rest her, she passed in December. Did you know that his mother held on long enough to sign the DNR, and then she was gone 2 weeks later? She let that settle in the air between them. His father is the one keeping this going, and even the general, even he signed the paperwork this morning. Claire felt something cold move through her chest. General Crow signed it this morning, 8 a.m. Donna picked up her coffee again. "So yes, child, everything has been tried. Everything has been decided. Your job tonight is to make sure he's comfortable. That's all." Claire nodded. She picked up the folder. She walked toward room 14, and she told herself she was just going to check his vitals, write her notes, and go home. She told herself that for about 45 seconds. Room 14 was dim. The monitors cast everything in a pale blue-green light. The ventilator breathed in its slow mechanical rhythm, in out, patient and indifferent and utterly inhuman. Eli Crow was 18 years old. Claire knew that from the chart, but standing next to his bed, it hit her differently. He was tall, she could tell, even horizontal. 6'1" maybe. The kind of build that suggested he'd played sports, lifted weights, moved through the world with the easy physical confidence of a young man who'd never once thought about his body failing him. His dark hair had grown out past his ears. Someone had trimmed it, probably a nurse, probably Donna, because that was the kind of thing Donna would do quietly and without being asked. There was a photograph taped to the wall beside the monitor. A man in dress blues, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, the kind of military bearing that made civilians stand up a little straighter just by proximity. And beside him, a teenage boy grinning like he'd just won something. Same jaw, same dark hair. The boy had his arm around the man's shoulders, and the man, General Nathan Crow, had his hand on top of his son's hand, and he was laughing. Claire looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at Eli. Then she pulled up the chair and opened the chart. She was 40 minutes into her review when the door opened. General Nathan Crow did not walk into a room the way most people walked into rooms. He moved like someone who had learned long ago that space was a resource to be managed precise, economical, deliberate. He was in civilian clothes, dark slacks, a gray button-down with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, but he carried himself like the uniform was still on. He was maybe 50, maybe 55. He looked older than the photograph. He looked like a man who had been running on something other than sleep for a very long time. He stopped when he saw Claire. "You're new," he said. "Yes, sir, Claire Bennett. I was assigned to Eli's room tonight." He looked at her for a moment with the flat, assessing gaze of a man who had spent 30 years evaluating personnel, and then he walked to the other side of Eli's bed and sat in the chair that was already positioned there, worn down in the exact shape of long hours many nights. "I won't be in your way," he said. "You're not in my way, General." He didn't say anything else. He reached out and put his hand over Eli's hand, the way he had in the photograph, and he sat there. Claire went back to the chart. They were both quiet for several minutes. Then Nathan said without looking up, "You were reading his history." "Yes, sir." "Find anything the other 14 nurses missed?" It wasn't sarcasm. Or it was, but not quite. There was something else underneath it. Something that sounded like a man who still needed to ask the question, even though he had already made peace with the answer. Claire hesitated. "I noticed something in his heart rate patterns." Nathan looked up. She hadn't meant to say it. She'd made a decision in the hallway, don't get this man's hopes up. "Claire, don't you dare," and then her mouth had opened and the words had come out anyway. "What kind of pattern?" he asked. His voice was controlled. Military controlled, which was a specific kind of careful that Claire recognized from the field. "It may be nothing," she said immediately. "What kind of pattern?" she told him. "About the orderly, about the dip in the recovery, about the second dip when the orderly left." Nathan was very still while she talked. When she finished, he said, "Dr. Halpern told me that involuntary fluctuations are normal with patients in his condition." "They are," Claire agreed, but she met his eyes. "But the timing was too consistent to feel like noise to me. It felt like response. And she stopped. She was going to say, "I've been watching the monitor from the hallway," and she realized how that would sound. She said instead, "I've been tracking his readings for the last hour, and there's a small but measurable uptick in heart rate variability every time someone enters the room, versus baseline when the room is empty." Nathan looked at his son. He was quiet for a long moment. "You know what they're doing Friday?" "Yes, sir." "I signed the paperwork this morning." His voice didn't waver. "I signed it because the doctors told me that signing it was the most loving thing I could do for my son." Claire didn't say anything. "I believed them." Nathan's jaw tightened just slightly. "I still believe them. I believe them, and I also couldn't make myself not come back tonight." He stopped. "I don't know what I'm doing here, Nurse Bennett. I'm a general. I don't do things without a reason, and I don't have a reason. I have a feeling. And I have never in 30 years made a decision based on a feeling." "With respect, sir," Claire said quietly, "you came back. That's a decision." He looked at her. "That counts as data," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not hope, it was too controlled for that, but something, a door that wasn't entirely shut. "What are you actually telling me?" "I'm telling you I want to run a more detailed observation. Tonight. On my own time, if I have to. Before Friday." The silence that followed was long enough to be its own kind of answer. "Dr. Halpern won't sanction it," Nathan said. "I know. You could lose your job. You've been here 3 days." "I know that too." Why? He wasn't challenging her. He genuinely wanted to understand. You don't know my son. You don't know me. You've got your whole career in front of you. Why? Claire looked at Eli, at the photograph on the wall, at the hand, a general's hand, a father's hand, resting over his son's. Because I've seen people get left behind, she said. And I've also seen people that everyone gave up on who weren't ready to be given up on. And I can't always tell the difference. But when I can't tell the difference, I'd rather be wrong in the direction of trying. She paused. That's all, sir. That's the whole reason. Nathan stared at her for a moment that felt very long. Then he said, what do you need? She needed time. She needed the chart, and she needed to put her hand on Eli's arm and say his name. That last one felt the most impossible. Not because it was complicated, it was profoundly simple, actually. Walk to the bedside, make contact, use a clear, direct voice, call his name. It was basic sensory stimulation. It was standard protocol for some disorders of consciousness. It was, in short, a completely reasonable thing to try. But Claire had read his file. She knew that this had been done. She knew that dozens of nurses and doctors and therapists had spoken to Eli Crow over the past 6 months. She knew that his mother had spoken to him and that his father spoke to him every night. And she knew that in 6 months he had not responded. She pulled her chair close to the bed. Nathan watched her from across the room. Eli, she said. Nothing. Eli, my name is Claire. I'm your nurse tonight. Can you hear me? Nothing. She watched the monitor. 61 beats per minute. Steady, indifferent. She leaned slightly closer. Not to the ear close, but not intimate. The way she'd learned in the field where you spoke to someone and you needed them to know that the voice was near, was real, was something that required a response. Eli, she said, and this time she let her voice drop, let it go quiet and direct, the way you spoke to someone who was in there but couldn't get out. I need you to listen to me. I know you're tired. I know everything feels very far away right now. But I need you to hear this. Your dad is in this room. He's right here. And I need you to give me something okay. Just one thing. I don't need much. Just one thing. 61, 61, 61, then 63. It lasted 2 seconds. And then it was 61 again. Claire didn't move. Did you see that? Nathan's voice came from across the room, low and tight. I saw it. She kept her eyes on the monitor. Eli, that's good. That's really good. Stay with me. Can you do that again? 61, 61, 64. Nathan was on his feet. He was at the bedside before Claire could even process that he'd moved. He put both hands on Eli's arm. Son, he said, and his voice broke slightly on the word, just slightly, and then he pulled it back together with the effort of a man who had been putting himself back together for a very long time. Son, I'm here. I need you to come back to me. 64, 65, and then something else. Eli Crow's left hand, lying flat on the bed, motionless for 6 months, twitched. It was small. It was barely anything. It was the kind of movement that in any other context would be dismissed in an instant as an involuntary muscle spasm, a reflex artifact, background noise from a body running on biological autopilot. But Claire had been watching his hands every 30 seconds since she sat down. His hands had not moved once in 40 minutes. She looked at Nathan. Nathan was staring at his son's hand like a man who has learned that the world can still surprise him and doesn't quite know what to do with that. Did he? Nathan's voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, Claire said. He did. And then because she had spent 4 years learning that the worst thing you can do in a crisis is stop moving. She turned toward the door, picked up the phone, and paged Dr. Halpern. The charge nurse who answered the page told her that Dr. Halpern had gone home at 9 and that she should document any observations in the chart for morning review. Claire said, "Get him on the phone." The charge nurse started to explain the protocol for non-emergency after-hours pages. Claire said, "Please tell Dr. Halpern that the Crow patient showed a volitional motor response at 12:32 a.m. on Thursday the 14th, and that I am requesting an immediate reassessment." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'll call him," the charge nurse said. "Thank you." Claire hung up and turned back to the room. Nathan Crow was leaning over his son's bed. His voice was low and steady and completely without pretense, all the military precision stripped away, leaving just the raw material underneath. "Hey, buddy," he said. "Hey, I'm here. I'm right here. You're not alone. You were never alone. Do you understand me? Not for one single day. Claire stood by the door and watched the monitor. 66, 67, 69. The hand twitched again, and somewhere down the hallway a phone began to ring. Dr. Marcus Halpern arrived at Blackstone Medical Center at 1:14 a.m., wearing a coat over his pajamas and an expression that communicated without any ambiguity whatsoever that whoever had dragged him out of bed had better have a very good reason. He was 58 years old. He had been the chief of neurology at Blackstone for 11 years. He had personally overseen Eli Crow's case since November. He had sat across from Nathan Crow in a conference room in December and explained as gently as a man of his clinical precision could manage that there was no neurological basis for expecting a meaningful recovery. He was not, in short, a man who expected to be surprised. He reviewed the chart notes Claire had written in the 40 minutes since she'd called the page. He looked at the monitor readings. He looked at Claire. He looked at Nathan. "Show me," he said. Claire approached the bed. Nathan stepped back to give her room. She put her hand on Eli's forearm, and she said his name. 61, 61, 62. Halpern's eyes moved to the monitor. His face didn't change. "Eli," Claire said, and now she lowered her voice, the way she'd learned the way that worked. "Your dad is here. General Crow is in this room. Do you hear me? He's right here." 64. Halpern blinked. "Eli," she said, "squeeze his hand." Nobody breathed. 65, 65, 65. And then Eli Crow's fingers slowly, with enormous effort, like a man moving rocks underwater, curled. Not all the way, not dramatically, but they curled. Nathan made a sound that wasn't any word in any language. It was just sound. Just the most fundamental pre-verbal cellular reaction of a father watching his son move his hand. Halpern stepped forward. He put 2 fingers on Eli's wrist. He leaned in close. "Eli," he said, using the same tone Claire had used, and she noticed that and filed it away. "If you can hear me, I need you to do that again. Squeeze, right now." 7 seconds. 10 seconds. Eli's fingers curled again. Halpern straightened up. He looked at Claire. He looked at the chart in his hand. He looked at the monitor. He was very quiet. Claire watched him do the math in real time. Everything he'd concluded, everything he'd documented, every conversation he'd had with Nathan Crow, every paper he'd read and studied, he'd cited and meeting, he'd sat in, all of it going through the recalculator right now, right in front of her, in the face of a movement that had no business happening. "Dr. Halpern," Nathan said quietly, "what does this mean?" Halpern looked at him for a long moment. "It means," he said slowly, "that we are not doing anything on Friday until I run a full reassessment." Nathan closed his eyes just for a moment, and in that moment, just that one, the general was entirely gone, and there was only a father. "Thank you," Nathan said. Halpern was already reaching for his phone. "Don't thank me yet, General. This could still be—" "I know," Nathan said. "Thank you anyway." Halpern stepped into the hallway to make calls. The door swung shut behind him. In the room it was quiet again. The ventilator breathed. The monitor beeped. Claire began writing in the chart, her pen moving in steady, careful lines, documenting everything. Nathan sat back down in his chair. He put his hand over his son's hand. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Claire." She looked up. "Thank you," he said. Just that. Quietly. Without performance. She nodded. She looked back at the chart. And from the bed, so soft that Claire almost missed it, almost Eli Crow exhaled. Not a mechanical breath, not the ventilator. His own. It was barely a sound. It was barely anything. But it was his. Down the hallway, Dr. Halpern was on the phone with the hospital's director of neurology, asking for a full diagnostic review to be scheduled first thing Thursday morning. His voice was professional, measured. It gave nothing away. But his hand holding the phone was not entirely steady. And in room 14, a rookie nurse sat beside an 18-year-old boy who wasn't supposed to still be fighting, and kept writing and kept watching and kept her promise to the version of him that no one else had thought to look for. The night was far from over, and neither, it turned out, was Eli Crow. Dr. Halpern came back into room 14 at 1:47 a.m. with a different energy than when he'd left. Not softer, the man didn't do soft, but recalibrated, like someone who had just been handed a problem they thought they'd already solved and was now forced to solve it again from scratch. "I've scheduled a full neuro workup for 7 a.m., he said. If we can get the machine cleared, and I want a new consult from Dr. Patel in neuro rehab." He paused. Friday is postponed, indefinitely pending review. Nathan stood up from his chair. How indefinitely? Until I know what I'm looking at, General. That's the honest answer. Is he in there, Doctor? Nathan's voice was controlled, but just barely. That's the only answer I'm asking for. Is my son in there? Halpern looked at Eli. Then he looked at Nathan. I don't know, he said. And I want you to understand that I am not saying that to hedge. I am saying it because 20 minutes ago, I would have said no with complete confidence. And now I can't say it with complete confidence, and that matters. He looked at Claire. Whatever you did, whatever you noticed, write it up in detail. Every observation, every timestamp. I want it documented before morning rounds. Yes, sir, Claire said. Halpern left again. The door swung shut, and then it was just the three of them, Claire, Nathan, and the boy in the bed who had just against every medical opinion in the building moved his hand. Nathan sat back down. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 4 months ago, a doctor told me that hoping was the cruelest thing I could do to myself. His voice was flat, not bitter, reporting a fact. He said the kindest thing I could do was accept. Do you believe that? Claire asked. I believed it enough to sign the paperwork. He looked at his son. I didn't believe it enough to stop coming back. Claire said nothing. She finished writing her notes. She pulled up the trending vitals on the monitor and started cross-referencing timestamps. Nathan watched her work. After a while, he said, Where were you deployed? Afghanistan first, then Kuwait. Combat. Enough of it. He nodded slowly. What made you stay in nursing after that? Claire didn't look up from the chart. Same thing that made me stop, she said. I got tired of losing people, and then I realized that in nursing, sometimes you don't. Nathan was quiet, and then very quietly he said he was supposed to start college in September. University of Virginia. Engineering. Claire looked up. He wanted to build bridges. Nathan let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. Not join the Corps, like me. Not politics, bridges. He said he wanted to build things that people relied on without thinking about it. The kind of thing that just works. He paused. I told him that sounded like a fine way to spend a life. Claire looked at Eli. At 18 years old in that bed with the photograph on the wall and 6 months of silence behind him. It does, she said. It sounds like a fine way to spend a life. Neither of them said anything else for a while, and then at 2:06 a.m. the monitor spiked. Not dramatically, not the kind of spike that brought nurses running. It went from 61 to 72 over about 8 seconds and then held at 70 for almost a full minute before sliding back down. Claire was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. She moved to the bedside. She looked at Eli's face. His eyelids were moving, not open, not even close to open, but underneath them moving. The rapid small movements of someone in REM, except Eli Crow had not shown any REM activity since October. What's happening? Nathan was beside her immediately. His eyes are moving, Claire said. Under the lids, that's neurological activity, General. That's his brain doing something. Is that good? I don't know yet. She picked up the phone and paged the overnight resident. I need to reach Dr. Halpern again. You just paged him 45 minutes ago. I know. Page him again. The overnight resident, a young man named Dr. Tran, who arrived looking like he'd been awake for 30 hours, which he probably had, came first. He looked at the monitor. He looked at Eli. He looked at Claire like she was personally responsible for a problem he didn't know how to categorize. His last EEG was 2 weeks ago, Claire said before he could speak. I think we need another one now. At 2 in the morning. His brain is active right now. A reading at 2 in the morning, it's exactly when we want one. Dr. Tran rubbed his face. He looked at Nathan Crow, who was standing with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has given orders on 3 continents and is now applying that same energy to a hospital room. Dr. Tran appeared to make a very quick calculation. I'll get the portable unit, he said. He was back in 11 minutes with the EEG cart and a technician who looked even less pleased about the hour than he did. They placed the electrodes. They ran the test. The technician watched the readings come in with a professionally neutral expression that slipped just slightly, just for a second, into something else. What? Nathan said. He'd been watching the technician's face. What does it say? The technician looked at Dr. Tran. Dr. Tran looked at the readout. And then Dr. Tran picked up his phone and called Halpern for the second time that night. Halpern arrived at 2:51 a.m. This time he wasn't wearing a coat over pajamas. He'd dressed properly, which meant he'd known when he left the first time that he was probably coming back. He looked at the EEG readout for a long time without speaking. Claire stood off to the side and watched him read it the way she'd learned to watch experienced doctors process unexpected information, watching not for what they said, but for what their body did before their professional training kicked in and composed their face. Halpern's hand went still on the paper. That was the tell. "General Crow," he said, and he set the readout down on the cart. "I need to be very careful with how I say this." "Say it plainly," Nathan said. "This EEG shows cortical activity consistent with what we would expect to see in a patient who is transitioning out of a vegetative state." The room was absolutely silent. "Transitioning," Nathan repeated. "Moving toward, not arrived. This is not a diagnosis of recovery. This is a data point that suggests we may have been looking at an incomplete picture of your son's neurological status." Halpern looked at Claire. "When did you first notice the heart rate variation?" 11:15 p.m., she said, when the orderly came in. "And the motor response, the hand movement, what exactly preceded it?" "Verbal stimulation, direct address, his father's presence." Halpern nodded slowly. He was putting something together. Claire could see him doing it, the mental architecture of a new theory being built brick by brick at 3 in the morning in a hospital room where nobody had expected to be surprised. "There's a condition," he said carefully, "called a minimally conscious state. It's distinct from a vegetative state in ways that are subtle, critically subtle. Patients in a minimally conscious state show inconsistent but reproducible evidence of awareness. They don't respond every time. They don't respond on command. The responses are small, easy to misattribute." He paused. "They are also capable of meaningful recovery in a way that vegetative state patients generally are not." Nathan's jaw was tight. "Are you telling me that Eli might have been minimally conscious this whole time?" "I'm telling you that the possibility cannot be excluded." Halpern said it carefully, like a man stepping onto ice he hadn't tested. "And that 6 months of clinical observation may have been interpreted through the wrong diagnostic lens." The silence that followed that sentence was enormous. Nathan turned away from both of them. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room, and Claire watched his shoulders, the set of them, the way they were held with military rigidity, and then for just one moment weren't. When he turned back around, his face was composed again, but his eyes were something else. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to call the best specialist in disorders of consciousness that I know," Halpern said. "She's at Johns Hopkins. I trained under her 20 years ago. Her name is Dr. Adler, and if anyone can tell us what's happening inside your son's brain, it's her." He paused. "It will take a day, maybe 2, to get her here. In the meantime, we run every test in the protocol. We document every response. We do not proceed with any withdrawal of care." Nathan looked at him. "You said yourself 20 minutes ago that you didn't know if he was in there." "That's correct." And now, Halpern looked at Eli. The ventilator breathed. The monitor beeped. Somewhere underneath all that machinery, a brain that everyone had written off was against at all odds making noise. "Now I think someone should be asking him," Halpern said. And he looked directly at Claire when he said it. She felt the weight of it land on her, not just the professional acknowledgement, but something bigger. The understanding that she had walked into this room 3 hours ago as a 3-day-old nurse with a hunch and a history, and that hunch had just rewritten 36 hours of certainty. "I'll start the protocol," she said. "Good." Halpern picked up his phone again. He was already dialing. "I'll be in the building. Page me if anything changes." He walked out. Dr. Tran followed. The technician began breaking down the EEG cart. And then it was just Claire and Nathan and Eli again, and the slow mechanical breathing of the ventilator, and the monitor ticking steadily upward, 63, 64, like something trying to climb. Nathan sat down. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his head bowed for a moment, and Claire had the sense of witnessing something private and chose to focus on the chart until he was done. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. She looked up. "Sir, when you first told me about the heart rate, I listened because you said it with conviction and because I was out of other options, not because I actually believed you." He met her eyes. I should have believed you. Claire shook her head. You had 30 years of people bringing you information that turned out to be wrong, General. Healthy skepticism is the rational response. Maybe. He looked at his son. But a father should have better instincts. You came back tonight, Claire said. When you had already signed the paperwork. You came back anyway. She paused. That's the instinct. You just needed someone to confirm it. Nathan was quiet. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper worn soft at the edges from handling. He didn't open it. He just held it. He wrote me a letter, he said, before the accident. He'd been accepted to UVA, and he wrote me an actual letter, not a text, not an email, a letter telling me about it, about what he wanted to do, about why. He turned the paper over in his hands. He said he wanted to build things that would still be standing after he was gone. He said he wanted his life to mean something past itself. Nathan's voice was steady, but only barely. He was 18. He was 18 years old, and he was already thinking like that. Claire didn't say anything. Some moments didn't need a response. They just needed a witness. Nathan folded the letter back up and put it in his pocket. He looked at Eli. Come back, son, he said simply quietly to the room. Whatever you're fighting through, come back. The monitor held at 65. The ventilator breathed. Nothing moved. And then at 3:22 a.m., Eli Crow's right hand, the one that had been flat and still since October, rose approximately half an inch off the bed and dropped back down. Claire saw it. Nathan saw it. They looked at each other across the bed like two people who had just witnessed something they could not fully explain and were not sure they were allowed to celebrate yet. Document it, Nathan said. Already writing, Claire said. She wrote it down to the second. She wrote the time, the context, the movement, the preceding stimulation, the sound of his father's voice. She wrote it clearly and precisely and without embellishment because the only thing that was going to help Eli Crow now was a record that no one could argue with. While she wrote, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Donna Marsh, who was apparently still at the nurse's station and apparently keeping a close eye on the overnight charting. Halpern just flagged your patient for priority review. What happened in there? Claire texted back. He moved his hand twice. EEG showed cortical activity. Halpern's calling. Hopkins. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then I'll be damned. And then after a pause, good catch, Bennett. Claire set her phone down. She looked at the clock. It was 3:25 a.m. She had been in room 14 for 3 hours and 38 minutes. She was supposed to be checking on 4 other patients. She was supposed to have taken a break an hour ago. She was supposed to have gone home at 7, slept, and come back tomorrow like nothing remarkable had happened. She picked up the chart instead, because remarkable things had happened and she was not done yet. At 3:41 a.m., she leaned close to the bed again. Nathan watched her without speaking. He'd learned in the past hour to read her rhythm, to know when she was doing something deliberate. Eli, she said in that same quiet, direct voice. It's Claire. I need you to hear me. Your brain is waking up. I know it's hard. I know everything probably feels wrong and heavy and like you're trying to move through concrete. But you're doing it. She paused. Your dad read your letter. He knows about the bridges. He wants you to build them. She stopped. Her voice stayed even, but only because she made it. So don't stop, okay? Don't stop. 65, 66, 67, 69. And then Eli Crow's lips moved. Not a word, not even close to a word. The smallest, most incomplete movement, like someone trying to remember how a sound is made, trying to find the mechanics of it from the inside out. His lips parted slightly and then closed, and that was all. But Nathan was out of his chair before the movement had even fully registered, and he had his son's face in his hands gently, so gently, the way you hold something you almost lost. And he said, I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Claire called Halpern. She didn't wait for the charge nurse this time. She called directly. He picked up on the second ring. He moved his lips, she said. Halpern was quiet for 1 second. Just one. I'm on my way up, he said. And as Claire put the phone down and turned back to the room, she caught something in the monitor that she had to look at twice to believe. Eli Crow's heart rate was 74 beats per minute. It had not been above 70 in 6 months. She didn't say anything to Nathan about it. Not yet. She wrote it down. She recorded it. She stood beside the bed of a boy who had been 3 hours from being gone, and watched his chest rise and fall, rise and fall. And she thought about combat medicine, about the people she'd watched come back from places that had no business being survivable. And she thought not for the first time that night, but differently, now that the body is a remarkable thing when it decides to fight. And Eli Crow, whatever it looked like from the outside, was fighting. Down the hallway, the elevator dinged. Footsteps approached the room, quick and certain. The door opened. Halpern walked in, pulled the chart from Claire's hands, looked at it for 15 seconds, looked at the monitor, and said without any of his usual clinical composure, "Get me Dr. Adler on the phone right now. I don't care that it's 4 a.m. Nathan looked at Claire. Claire looked at Eli. And somewhere behind those closed eyes, in whatever dark and distant place a person goes, when the world stops making sense, Eli Crow kept fighting his way back. Dr. Adler picked up on the 4th ring. Halpern had stepped into the hallway to make the call, but the door hadn't latched completely, and Claire could hear his voice through the gap, not the words but the tone. Urgent. Controlled. The voice of a man who does not make 4 a.m. phone calls unless the situation has moved past the point where waiting until morning is defensible. Claire stayed at the bedside. Nathan stayed at the bedside. Neither of them spoke. The monitor held at 72 and Eli's lips had not moved again, but his face had changed in some way that Claire couldn't quantify clinically and couldn't stop looking at a subtle shift in the muscle tone around his jaw, something that hadn't been there 3 hours ago when she first pulled up her chair. She wrote it down anyway. She wrote everything down, every observation that her training told her to record and every one that her instinct told her mattered, even if she couldn't explain why yet. Nathan broke the silence first. "What do you think Adler will say?" "I think she'll want to see him herself before she says anything," Claire said. "Specialists in disorders of consciousness don't diagnose over the phone. How long to get her here?" Halpern said a day, maybe 2. Nathan nodded slowly. He was doing the math the same way Claire was measuring the distance between now and whatever came next, calculating whether the ground they'd gained tonight was enough to hold. The door opened and Halpern came back in. His expression had shifted, still controlled, still clinical, but something underneath it had changed the way ice changes when it starts to thin. Not breaking, just different. "She's flying in tomorrow afternoon," he said. "She'll assess Eli at 4 p.m. Nathan exhaled. "Good. I want to be clear about something," Halpern said, and he looked at both of them, at Nathan and then at Claire, and he held Claire's gaze just a beat longer. "Dr. Adler is coming because the data tonight warrants it. Not because we have a diagnosis, not because we have a prognosis. We have a data point, several data points, and they are significant enough to pause everything and look again." He paused. "But I've been in this field for 26 years, and I've seen families, good families, strong families, build a house of hope on a foundation that couldn't hold it, and I've had to watch that house fall. I won't do that to you, General, so I'm asking you to hold what happened tonight loosely." Nathan looked at him for a long moment. "With respect, Doctor, I've commanded men in combat situations where the probability of success was less than 10%. I know how to hold hope without losing my footing." Halpern nodded. "Fair enough. But I'll tell you something else," Nathan said. 3 hours ago, I had made my peace. I had signed the paper. I had told my son goodbye internally, silently, in the way you do when there's nothing left to do. And then this nurse, he gestured at Claire without taking his eyes off Halpern. This nurse who has been here 3 days looked at a readout that every other person on your staff walked past, and she said something was wrong with the picture. He let that land. So you'll forgive me if my definition of sufficient evidence has been recalibrated tonight. Halpern didn't respond to that. He looked at the monitor. He looked at Eli. "I'll be back at 6 for pre-rounds," he said. "Push me if anything changes before then." He left. The room went quiet again. Claire looked at the clock, 4:09 a.m. She had been in this room for 4 hours. At some point in the next hour, the day shift would start filtering in, and people would hear what had happened overnight, and the story would move through the ICU, the way stories always move through ICUs fast and with elaboration. She needed the documentation locked and complete before that happened. She had been writing for 20 minutes when Nathan said very quietly, "He used to be afraid of the dark." She looked up. When he was small, Nathan was looking at Eli, not at her. He had this flashlight he kept under his pillow. Red plastic shaped like a rocket. He'd turn it on in the middle of the night and just hold it. A pause. He outgrew it eventually, but when he was maybe 6, 7, every single night, that flashlight. Another pause. I thought about that a lot these past 6 months, wondering if it's dark wherever he is, wondering if he's scared. Claire set down her pen. In my experience, she said carefully, people who come back from where he's been don't describe it as dark. Nathan looked at her. What do they describe it as? Quiet, she said. Most of them say quiet, like waiting, like being in a room where you can hear things happening on the other side of the wall, but you can't quite get to the door. She paused. Some of them say they knew people were there. They just couldn't answer. Nathan absorbed that. He looked back at his son. Then he knows we're here. I think so, Claire said. I think he's known for a while. That was when Eli's monitor spiked again, harder this time. 76, 78, 81, and it held there and his head moved. Not a twitch. His head actually turned fractionally toward the sound of their voices. Nathan was on his feet. Eli, don't crowd him, Claire said, moving fast. Talk to him. Normal voice. Don't alarm him. Nathan caught himself. He pulled back, took a breath, and said in the most controlled, even father-to-son voice Claire had ever heard from a man who was clearly falling apart inside. Hey, buddy, I'm right here. You're okay. You're safe. 82, 83. Eli's head held its new position, turned slightly toward Nathan's voice. His eyelids flickered. Not opening, but flickering the way a light does when the power is coming back after an outage, unsteady at first finding its level. His eyes, Nathan said. I see it. Claire had the phone in her hand already. She was paging the overnight resident in Halpern simultaneously. Keep talking to him. What do I say? Anything, something he knows, something real. Nathan leaned in close, but not crowding the way Claire had shown him. Without ever formally showing him, he'd been watching her all night, learning her method, and now he used it. Eli, it's Dad. I'm here. You're at Blackstone Medical. You have been here for a while, and I know that, and I'm not going anywhere. His voice was perfectly even, and it cost him everything to keep it that way. I got your letter about the bridges. I read it about 400 times. I might have it memorized. He stopped, swallowed. I told your uncle about UVA, and he cried, which was frankly embarrassing for the whole family. You're going to have to come back just to give him a hard time about it. 84, Eli's fingers moved, not a twitch this time. His right hand, the one that had lifted at 3:22 a.m., moved deliberately slowly toward Nathan's hand on the bed rail. Not reaching, not grasping, but moving toward. He's reaching, Claire said, and her voice had lost its professional steadiness completely. She didn't try to get it back. General, give Ian your hand. Nathan put his hand under his son's hand. And Eli Crow's fingers, slowly, like someone learning how fingers work from the inside out, curled around his father's thumb and held on. Nathan made no sound. His face did everything his voice wasn't doing, broke open and rebuilt itself in the span of about 3 seconds. And when it came back together, it was the face of a man who has been handed back something he'd already grieved and doesn't yet have the architecture to process that. I've got you, he said. His voice was barely there. I've got you, son. The door opened. Dr. Tran came in at a near run, saw the monitor, saw Nathan and Eli, and stopped. Document the purposeful hand movement at 4:17 a.m., Claire told him. Because her hands were full, she was recording the monitor readings and watching Eli's face, and she needed a second set of documentation. Dr. Tran pulled out his tablet and started writing without being asked twice. Halpern arrived 4 minutes later. He looked at the chart. He looked at the monitor. He looked at Eli's hand still loosely holding his father's thumb. He stood very still for a moment. Eli, he said, just the name. Testing. The monitor went to 86. Halpern looked at Claire. He responds to voices, she said, consistently, with increasing intensity over the last hour. The responses are volitional. They're not reflexive. They're not random. They correlate directly to verbal input. I know what volitional means, Nurse Bennett. I know you do. I'm saying it out loud so it's in the room. Something crossed Halpern's face, something that in another man might have been the beginning of a smile. He looked at the monitor again. Get me a full panel, metabolic, hormonal, everything. And I want to repeat EEG in the next hour. He looked at Dr. Tran. You're staying. Dr. Tran, who had clearly been hoping to at least get back to the resident lounge for 20 minutes, said, "Yes, sir," with the practiced resignation of someone who had long since surrendered the concept of sleep. Halpern stepped to the bedside. He stood next to Nathan. He looked at Eli and Claire watched him look. Watched the neurologist in him, doing the assessment, cataloging every micro-expression, every muscle response, every deviation from the baseline he'd been tracking for months. And she watched the other thing happen too. The human thing, the thing that happens when a doctor who has held a very certain conclusion for a very long time finds the floor shifting under it. "Son," Halpern said very quietly, like he was trying the word out, "can you open your eyes for me?" The room held its breath. 86, 87, nothing. Then Eli's face contracted, a small, concentrated effort visible in the tension around his eyes and forehead, and his left eye opened. Barely. A sliver of white and iris immediately overwhelmed by light and immediately closing again. 2 seconds at most, but it opened. Dr. Tran made a sound. Nathan made no sound at all, but his hand still holding Eli's hand went white at the knuckles. Halpern turned around and walked directly to the far corner of the room and stood there with his back to everyone for about 15 seconds. When he turned back, his face was a wall again, but a thinner one than before. "All right," he said, "all right." He was talking to himself as much as anyone. He walked back. He picked up the chart. He started writing. "I am formally suspending the withdrawal order," he said without looking up. "Effective this moment. I want a care team meeting at 7 a.m. I want every specialist on Eli's case in that room." He looked at Claire. "You're presenting everything you observed tonight in chronological order, starting with 11:15 p.m. He looked back at the chart. "And I want someone to explain to me how 6 months of clinical observation produced a conclusion that a 3-day nurse contradicted in 4 hours." Nobody answered that. It wasn't really a question. Claire didn't say anything. She was watching Eli's face because his eye had moved again under the lid, and the monitor was at 89. And something told her, the same instinct that had put her in this room to begin with, that they were not done tonight. She was right. At 4:52 a.m., Eli Crow opened both eyes. They stayed open for 11 seconds. They were unfocused, aimed somewhere above and to the left, seeing something or nothing, but they were open, and in those 11 seconds, Eli Crow was looking at the world he'd been absent from for 6 months, and the world was looking back at him. Nathan leaned into his son's line of sight. He didn't say anything. He just put himself there where Eli could see him, and he held on. Eli's eyes moved. They found his father's face. 11 seconds, then they closed again. But they had moved, purposefully, measurably, reproducibly moved toward a face, toward a voice, toward the one constant thing in 6 months of silence. Claire was crying. She realized it without embarrassment, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and kept writing. Dr. Tran was not crying, but he had stopped writing and was staring at Eli with the expression of a man revising his entire understanding of what his job was going to be for the next 20 years. Halpern said, "Get Dr. Adler on the phone again. Tell her 4 p.m. tomorrow is no longer soon enough. Tell her I need her here by noon." He said it flatly, professionally, the way he said everything. But his pen had stopped moving on the chart, and when he set it down, it was not quite steady. The night shift was almost over. In another hour and a half, the day would begin the formal machinery of reassessment, the care team meeting, the arrival of Dr. Adler, the impossible administrative task of undeciding a decision that had been signed in triplicate and ratified by an ethics board. All of that was coming, and it would be complicated and contested, and there would be people in that 7 a.m. meeting who had staked their professional credibility on a conclusion that 4 hours of one-night nurse's observation had just cracked open. Claire knew all of that, but right now in room 14 at 4:53 in the morning, none of it had arrived yet. Right now, there was only Nathan sitting beside his son, with his son's hand in his, talking quietly about bridges and rocket-shaped flashlights in a letter he'd read 400 times. And there was Eli, eyes closed again, but eyelids moving, heart rate settling into a new rhythm, not the flat 61 of before, but something higher, something with more variation, more life in it. And there was Claire sitting in her chair, with the chart in her lap, writing down everything she'd seen, everything she'd done, every timestamp and vital sign, and tiny movement that had carried them from the edge of a goodbye to the beginning of something that didn't have a name yet. Donna Marsh appeared in the doorway at 5:15, mug of fresh coffee in hand. taking in the scene with the eyes of someone who had seen a great deal and been wrong about thinking she'd seen everything. She looked at the monitor. She looked at Nathan. She looked at Claire. "Dr. Halpern called me in early," she said. "He said you'd need backup for the morning handoff." "I'm okay," Claire said. "You've been in this room since midnight," Donna said. "You haven't taken a break. You haven't eaten. And you're crying, which you should know is extremely obvious even when you think it isn't." She set the coffee down on the side table next to Claire. "You're also the reason that boy is still being treated instead of being prepared for withdrawal." She paused. "So drink the coffee, Bennett. You've got a long day ahead." Claire picked up the coffee. It was hot and strong, and she didn't say thank you because she knew Donna would find it irritating. "There's something else," Donna said, and her voice shifted slightly. Claire looked at her. "Word got out," Donna said, "about what happened tonight. The overnight staff talk. It's already moving." She paused. "Dr. Reeves, the one who was lead on the ethics board review, he's coming in at 6, an hour early." She let that sit for a second. "He's not coming in because he's excited, Claire. He's coming in because he's the one who signed off on Friday's order, and right now his signature is on a piece of paper that looks like it was wrong." Claire felt something shift in her stomach. Not fear exactly, but the recognition that the morning was not going to be only about hope. "Let him come," Nathan said from across the room. He had heard everything. Donna looked at him. "I've dealt with men who needed to be wrong before," Nathan said. His voice was quiet, but it had all the structure of a man who has been in rooms where the outcome depended on who blinked first. "I can deal with one more." Donna looked at Claire. Claire looked at the monitor. Eli's heart rate was 81. Steady, persistent, alive. The coffee was hot in her hands. The chart was complete. The sun, somewhere beyond the walls of Blackstone Medical Center, was beginning its approach to the horizon. And in 37 minutes, Dr. Reeves would walk through the front door of this hospital, and the fight, the real fight, the one that happened not in the body, but in the conference rooms, in the boardrooms, in the offices of people who had already decided was about to begin. Dr. Reeves arrived at 6:02 a.m., and Claire heard him before she saw him. His voice carried from the nurse's station, not loud but precise. The kind of voice that had learned long ago that controlled volume was more effective than volume itself. She caught fragments through the door protocol, premature conclusion, chain of documentation. And then one phrase that landed differently than the others: "Who authorized the overnight EEG?" Donna's response was too low to hear. Claire looked at Nathan. He was already looking at her. "Stay in here," he said quietly. Not a command he had enough self-awareness to know it wasn't his place to command her, but a suggestion from a man who had read the room correctly. "I need to be at the 7 a.m. meeting," Claire said. "Halpern asked me to present." "Then let him do the talking until 7. Nathan's eyes were level. "Pick your ground carefully, Claire. Don't spend yourself early." She recognized the strategy immediately. It was field doctrine, and it was correct. She nodded. She stayed in the room. She finished her documentation, reviewed it once, reviewed it again, and then sat with her coffee and waited. At 6:14, the door opened and Dr. Reeves walked in. He was 60, maybe 62. Silver-haired, thin-framed, the kind of man who wore his credentials in his posture. He looked at the monitor. He looked at Eli. He looked at Claire with the expression of someone who has been handed an administrative problem wearing a human face. "You're the overnight nurse," he said. "Claire Bennett." "Yes." "You initiated the after-hours EEG. Dr. Tran ordered it. I requested it based on observed patient responses." Dr. Tran is a second-year resident. Reeves moved to the foot of the bed and looked at the chart without touching it. The EEG was run without attending authorization at 2:40 a.m. Dr. Halpern was on the phone with me at the time of the request. He authorized it verbally. Reeves looked at her. "In the stimulation protocol you applied, where is that documented?" "Page 11 of my overnight notes, time-stamped and detailed." He picked up the chart. He read. Claire watched him read the same way she'd watched Halpern read it 3 hours earlier, looking for the body's response before the professional one. "By my son." Reeves was better at keeping still than Halpern was. His face gave very little, but his eyes moved back over the entry for 4:52 a.m. twice. He opened his eyes, Nathan said from his chair. Reeves looked at him. General Crow. Both eyes, 4:52 this morning, held for 11 seconds, made purposeful ocular movement toward my face. Nathan's voice was absolutely flat. It's in the chart. I'm reading the chart. Then you've read what your ethics board authorized removing on Friday. Nathan's eyes didn't waver. You signed that order, Dr. Reeves. The room was very quiet. Reeves set the chart down. The order was based on 6 months of consistent clinical data and the recommendations of 3 independent neurologists, all of whom missed a minimally conscious state, Nathan said. That has not been formally diagnosed. Dr. Halpern called Dr. Adler at Johns Hopkins at 4 a.m. this morning. She's rerouting her schedule to be here by noon. I think we both know what that means. Nathan stood up from his chair slowly, the way men stand when they want to take up more space without appearing to try. He was 6'2". He was a general. He had stood in front of things more formidable than a hospital ethics board, and his body remembered all of it. You signed the order in good faith. I respect that. I signed the same order in good faith, but the data has changed, and I think you're here this morning because you know it and you need to see for yourself. Reeves looked at Eli. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Nurse Bennett. Yes. Talk me through what you saw at 11:15 p.m. Walk me through it exactly. Claire stood up. She picked up her notes, and she started from the beginning. She talked for 12 minutes. She didn't editorialize. She didn't reach for emotional language. She gave him timestamps, vital signs, observed behaviors, clinical context, and the methodology she'd applied, the same approach she'd learned in the field, adapted for a hospital room. She was precise, and she was thorough, and she did not look away from him once. When she finished, Reeves was quiet. You have field medic training, he said. 4 years, Army. And in your field experience, you encountered patients in minimally conscious states. I encountered patients that everyone around me had decided were gone, Claire said carefully, and I encountered some who weren't. How did you know the difference? I didn't always, but the ones who weren't gone, they had a pattern. They responded to something familiar even when they didn't respond to anything else. Sometimes it was a voice, sometimes it was a word, sometimes it was just someone sitting close enough that they could tell the room had changed. She paused. Eli responded to his father, consistently, reproducibly, and with increasing intensity over 4 hours. That's not background noise, that's signal. Reeves looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Nathan. Then he looked at Eli. He said nothing for almost 30 seconds. Then he said, I'll be at the 7 a.m. meeting. He picked up his jacket from where he draped it over the chair. I won't be opposing the reassessment. He walked out. The door swung shut. Claire sat back down. Her hands, she noticed, were very slightly unsteady, not with fear, but with the sustained effort of the last several hours finally catching up to her body. She pressed them flat on the chart and breathed. Well done, Nathan said quietly. He was never going to fight it, Claire said. He just needed to see for himself. Nobody wants to be the person who got it wrong. But nobody with a conscience wants to stay wrong once they know it. Nathan looked at her. You're more generous than I am. I've had practice. She looked at the monitor. Eli's heart rate was holding at 79. And I've made my own wrong calls. You don't get to ask forgiveness for yours if you don't extend it. At 6:47 a.m., Donna appeared in the doorway. 7 o'clock in Conference B, she said. Halpern wants you there 5 minutes early. She looked at Nathan. General, there's a waiting area on the 2nd floor if you'd like. I'll stay here, Nathan said. Donna nodded. She looked at Claire. Go. I've got him. Claire looked at Eli. She looked at the monitor for her. She looked at Nathan, who had not left his son's side in hours and showed no inclination to start now. I'll be back, she told Eli, the same way she told patients in the field before she left them with a medic and moved up, meaning it as a promise, not a platitude. I'll be right back. She left. The door swung shut behind her. The hallway felt enormous after hours in that room. She walked to Conference B. The room had 8 people in it already. Halpern Reeves, Dr. Trana, 2 neurologists whose names Claire didn't know yet, a woman from hospital administration with a laptop and a careful expression, and 2 nurses from the day shift who'd clearly been briefed and were watching Claire, the way people watch someone who has just done something they cannot quite categorize. Halpern stood at the head of the table. He looked like a man who had also not slept, but wore it differently than Claire did, like fuel rather than weight. We'll begin, he said. He looked at Claire. Nurse Bennett. She stood up, she presented, she used the same structure she'd used with Reeves timestamp observation vital response timestamp, and she spoke clearly and at a pace that let people write things down. She presented the 11:15 p.m. heart rate variation, the first motor response at 12:32 a.m., the EEG results at 2:51 a.m., the purposeful hand movement at 4:17 a.m., the bilateral eye opening at 4:52 a.m., and the consistent pattern of response to Nathan Crow's voice throughout the night. When she sat down, the room was quiet. Then one of the neurologists, a woman in her 40s named Dr. Solis, who had been on Eli's case since December, said, "I reviewed the EEG from last night against the October baseline. The difference is not subtle." Everyone looked at her. "I've been on this case for 2 months," she said. "I want to be clear that I am not making excuses. I am saying that the October EEG set a baseline that subsequent reviews were measured against, and that baseline itself may have been captured at the wrong point in what appears to be a fluctuating picture." She paused. "In plain language, if Eli Crow is in a minimally conscious state, his most responsive windows may not have aligned with our assessment windows. We may have been testing him when he was least capable of responding and drawing conclusions from that." The word may was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Everyone at the table knew it. "What's the proposed path forward?" the administrator asked. Halpern spoke. "Dr. Adler from Hopkins is arriving at noon. She will conduct a formal CRSR-R assessment. That's a standardized scale for detecting consciousness in patients with severe brain injuries, more sensitive than the GCS. If Eli scores in the minimally conscious range, we restructure the entire care plan." He looked around the table. "The withdrawal order is suspended until further notice." Reeves said agreed. No one objected. Claire looked at her hands on the table. She thought about Eli's fingers curling around Nathan's thumb at 4:17 a.m. She thought about the letter about bridges and the rocket-shaped flashlight, and 18 years old and a whole life that had been 36 hours from being decided. She thought, not yet. Not yet. The meeting ended at 7:44. Claire was supposed to have gone home an hour ago. She walked back to room 14 instead. Nathan looked up when she came in. "How did it go?" "Withdrawal order is suspended. Dr. Adler is confirmed for noon. Dr. Solis thinks Eli may have been in a fluctuating conscious state that was missed because assessments happened in his low windows." Nathan let out a long breath. "Meaning he was reachable this whole time?" "Possibly." Claire sat down. She was tired in the deep way that exists past exhaustion, where your body has used up everything and is now running on something else. "We don't know yet. Adler will tell us more." Nathan looked at his son. 6 months, he said. 6 months, and he might have been in there, knowing, waiting. His voice was even, but there was something moving under it, slow and enormous, like a current you can't see from the surface. How do you hold that the same way you held the last 6 months?" Claire said. "One day." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I wasn't here every day." She looked at him. "The first 2 months I was here, every day. And then command doesn't stop because your personal life breaks. There were 2 weeks in November, a week in January." His jaw tightened. "I told myself it was because the doctors said he couldn't know the difference. I told myself," he stopped. "I told myself a lot of things." "You came back every time," Claire said. "That's not absolution." "I'm not offering absolution. I'm offering fact." She looked at him steadily. "You came back. And last night when you sat in that chair and talked to him about bridges and Uncle crying at the good news that reached him, the voice he came back toward was yours." She paused. "That matters." Nathan looked at his son. His hand found Eli's hand again, the way it had been finding it all night, reflexively, like breathing. At 9:20, Eli opened his eyes again. This time they stayed open for almost a minute. They were glassy, unfocused, moving slowly as if the muscles controlling them were relearning their function in real time. But they were open and the light was in them, and somewhere behind all of it, there was a brain doing the extraordinary labor of finding its way back to the surface. Claire moved into his line of sight slowly, no sudden movements, and said his name. His eyes moved toward her voice. "Good," she said. "That's good, Eli. I'm Claire. I've been here all night. You're safe." She moved slightly to the left. His eyes tracked her. "Good. Keep doing that." She went left, went right, went closer, went farther. His eyes followed with increasing accuracy, the tracking becoming less effortful with each pass as if the neural pathway was warming up, remembering itself. Is he seeing me? Nathan asked from across the bed. Claire stepped aside. Nathan moved into Eli's line of sight. Eli's eyes found him immediately. No search, no drift. Direct. Nathan's face did the same thing it had done at 4:17 a.m., broke apart and reassembled in the space of a few seconds, leaving something rawer and truer in its place. Hey, son, he said, voice barely holding. Hey, I see you. Eli's lips moved, same as before, no sound, no words. The attempt at language, the body remembering that language, is a thing it used to do. Don't force it, Claire said quickly. Don't try to talk yet. Just stay here. Stay with us. His lips stilled. His eyes stayed on his father. For 47 seconds, Eli Crow looked at his father, and Nathan Crow looked at his son, and the 6 months between them hung in the air like something that was slowly being folded up and put away. Then Eli's eyes closed again, and his breathing deepened, and his heart rate settled back to its new normal. Not the flat 61 of before, but 73, steady and purposeful, like a man walking a road he's finally sure of. Claire was paging Halpern before the eyes had fully closed. Halpern came. He assessed. He documented. He called Dr. Adler directly and gave her the new update. Eyes open, visual tracking, purposeful, and Claire heard Dr. Adler's response through the phone, just barely. I'm already at the airport. At 10:15, a new development that nobody had prepared for. The hospital's public relations coordinator appeared at the nurses' station asking for Halpern. Word had gotten out beyond the overnight staff, now beyond the ICU. One of the day nurses had a sister who worked in hospital administration. The story of the rookie nurse and the general's son was already 3 people removed from the source, which meant it was already becoming a version of itself that bore a complicated relationship to what had actually happened. Halpern intercepted the PR coordinator in the hallway. Claire heard his voice. Not a word to anyone outside this unit until Dr. Adler has completed her assessment. That is not a request. The coordinator retreated. Donna appeared at Claire's elbow with a look that said she had also heard. You're going to be a story, she said. You know that. I'd rather be a nurse, Claire said. You can be both, but get ahead of it. Donna lowered her voice. There are people in this building who are going to want to frame what happened last night as a system working correctly. Eventually catching the right answer. Institutional course correction. Maybe that's what it was. Donna looked at her. Is that what it was? Claire didn't answer that. She looked down the hallway at room 14. At the door that had been closed and locked in every meaningful sense 6 hours ago and was now open in every meaningful sense she could name. What it was, she said, is that a kid who was about to be gone isn't about to be gone anymore. That's the part that matters. Donna nodded. Fair enough, she paused. Go home, Claire. Not until Adler. Go home. Sleep. Come back. Adler will still be here. Eli will still be here. Donna said it firmly. You fought the fight. Let the day's shift carry it for a few hours. That's not quitting. That's how this works. Claire looked at the door. She looked at the clock. 10:31 a.m. She walked back to room 14. She stood in the doorway. Nathan looked up. I have to go for a few hours, she said. The day team will. I know, Nathan said. You've been here since midnight. Dr. Adler is coming at noon. She's already at the airport. I'll be here. Claire looked at Eli. His eyes were closed. His heart rate was 73. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm that was hour by hour becoming more his own. He's going to need time, she said. Even with the best assessment, even with everything Adler finds, it's going to be slow. Recovery from this is not linear. It's not a straight line up. There'll be days that look like setbacks. I understand. I just want you to know that before I leave, so that if there's a setback today or tomorrow, you know it doesn't undo last night. Nathan looked at her. Nothing undoes last night, he said simply. Claire nodded. She looked at Eli one more time. I'll see you tonight. She told him the same promise she'd made when she left for the meeting, meaning it the same way. She walked down the hallway, picked up her bag from the locker room, and pushed through the front doors of Blackstone Medical Center into the sharp morning air. It was 10:44 a.m. on a Thursday. 36 hours ago, this had been the day before an ending. She stood there for a moment, just standing, letting the cold air hit her face, and she thought about an 18-year-old boy and a red rocket-shaped flashlight and a letter about bridges that a father had read 400 times. And she thought about all the people she had watched leave and all the ones she had watched come back. And she thought about the specific, irreducible, impossible to train difference between the two. The thing you either felt or you didn't. The signal inside the noise. The moment where the data said one thing and something deeper said, look again. She had looked again, and back in room 14, Nathan Crow sat beside his son, holding his hand, and Eli Crow's heart beat on 73, 73, 73, steady as a bridge that has decided against all expectation to hold. She had slept 3 hours, which was not enough and was also more than she'd expected. She had driven back to Blackstone with her hair still damp and a coffee she'd made at home that was already cold by the time she reached the parking lot, and she had walked through the front doors with the particular focus of someone who left something unfinished and cannot fully rest until they return to it. Donna was at the nurse's station. She looked up when Claire came in. Adler's in with him now, she said. Has been for 40 minutes. How does she seem? Donna considered that. Like someone who came a long way and is not regretting it. Claire set her bag down. And Halpern, standing outside the door like a man waiting for a verdict. Donna looked at her steadily. Go, but don't go in. Adler works alone. Claire walked down the hallway. Halpern was exactly where Donna said he'd be standing outside room 14, arms crossed, watching the closed door with the expression of a man who has spent his career being the person inside the room and is finding the outside considerably harder. He heard her coming and looked up. You came back. I said I would. How much sleep did you get? Enough. He looked at her in a way that said he did not believe that and also was not going to pursue it. Adler has been in there since 1:30. She brought her own assessment tools. The CRSR-R, a visual pursuit protocol, and something she's been developing herself for auditory command response. He paused. She's thorough. What happened while I was gone? Eli was awake for nearly 20 minutes at noon. Sustained eye-opening. Donna said he tracked her voice across the room 3 times without prompting. He said it evenly, but there was something underneath it, something that Claire was beginning to recognize as Halpern's version of awe, a thing he kept behind his clinical language, the way other people kept photographs behind glass. He also attempted vocalization at 12:40. Claire went still. Sound, not words, but intentional sound, exhaled with effort shaped. Donna described it as, he checked his notes, attempting. Attempting. Claire held that word for a moment. An 18-year-old boy, 6 months silent, attempting to speak. Reaching for language from whatever depth he'd been in the way you reach for something in dark water. Feeling for it before you can see it. Has Nathan eaten? She asked. Donna made him go to the cafeteria at 1:15. He was back in 12 minutes. Claire almost smiled. Of course he was. They stood together in the hallway and waited. 10 minutes. 15. Halpern checked his phone twice and put it away twice. Claire watched the door. At 2:41, the door opened and Dr. Margaret Adler walked out. She was 61, compact with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that moved with the rapid precision of someone whose entire career had been built on seeing things other people missed. She was carrying a clipboard with handwritten notes, handwritten notes in a small, dense script, and she was already looking at Halpern before the door had fully closed behind her. Marcus, she said. Margaret, your girl's instinct was correct. She said it plainly without preamble. She looked at Claire. You're Bennett. Yes. Walk me through your 11:15 observation again. Exactly. Claire walked her through it. Adler listened without interrupting, her pen moving on the clipboard in short notations, her eyes on Claire's face with an attention that felt like being read. When Claire finished, Adler nodded once. The heart rate response to the orderly's entrance and exit, that's the tell. That's bilateral awareness of environmental change. It's small, but it's real, and it's exactly the kind of thing that gets attributed to autonomic variation and dismissed. She looked at Halpern. How long was he scored as vegetative? From November. The October EEG was read as, I've seen the October EEG. Adler's voice was not accusatory. It was something more uncomfortable than accusatory. It was factual. It was read correctly given the data available. The problem is that a single EEG in a fluctuating, conscious state is like taking one photograph of a river and concluding it doesn't move. She looked at her clipboard. Eli Crow is in a minimally conscious state plus. That's the formal designation. It means he has reproducible evidence of language processing, purposeful movement, and sustained visual pursuit. It means he understands more than he can currently express. She stopped. Let that sentence take up its full space in the hallway. It also means that the prognosis for meaningful recovery is substantially better than what his chart has been predicting for 6 months. Halpern was very still. What does recovery look like in your assessment? Uncertain, slow, nonlinear. Adler said it without softening it, the way good doctors deliver hard truths, not cruelly but clearly, because clarity is its own form of respect. He will need intensive rehabilitation, months, probably longer. There will be setbacks. He may not recover full function in every domain. But, she looked at her notes. When I asked him to squeeze my hand, he did. When I said his name, his eyes came to me. When I told him his father was outside the door, his heart rate went up 6 beats and held there. She looked up. He is in there, Marcus. He has been in there. And with the right intervention starting now, the trajectory is real. Halpern exhaled. It was the only time in the 12 hours Claire had known him that she heard his breathing change in response to something emotional rather than physical. I'll need to call the care team, he said. Do it. I'll stay through tomorrow. Adler was already moving. But first I want to speak to the father. She went back into the room. The door closed again. Halpern stood in the hallway for a moment. He looked at Claire. I owe you an acknowledgement. He said, You don't? I do. I came here at 1 a.m. because I was paged and because it's my job and I came skeptical. He said it directly the way a man of his precision could not say it otherwise, without softening, without excessive self-flagellation, just truth. What you saw and what you acted on was correct. The institution failed that patient, and a person who had been here 3 days caught it. He paused. That's not the way it's supposed to work. It's also exactly the way it's supposed to work. And I want you to know that I know the difference. Claire looked at him. Thank you, she said, for coming at 1 a.m., for coming back at 3, for calling Adler, for standing outside that door for 40 minutes. Halpern nodded. He straightened his jacket. I have calls to make, he said, and walked down the hallway, and Claire watched him go, a man reconstructing his own professional certainty in real time, quietly with dignity, the way the best ones do. She waited outside room 14. At 3:08, the door opened and Nathan came out. He looked like a man who had just been handed back something so large and so heavy with meaning that he was still figuring out how to carry it. His face opened in a way she'd not seen before, all the general stripped away, just a father standing in a fluorescent hallway, holding more than he'd expected to hold by this morning. He looked at Claire for a moment without speaking. She said his prognosis is real, Claire said carefully. She said a lot of things. Nathan's voice was thick. He stopped, collected himself. She said that when she told him in there directly to him that he was going to get better, his face changed. She said that in her experience, that response was consistent with comprehension. He stopped again. His jaw worked. He understood her. He was lying there and he understood what she said and he responded to it. Claire didn't say anything for a moment. He's been understanding things, Nathan said, this whole time. Or some of it, some window of it, He stopped because the sentence had taken him somewhere he hadn't prepared to go, and he needed a second to come back from it. Don't do that to yourself, Claire said quietly. He looked at her. The road you're about to go down, about what he might have heard, what he might have understood, the 2 weeks in November and the week in January, I know. I can see you going there. She held his gaze. You came back every time, and the voice he responds to most is yours. That is the whole story. Everything else is a door you don't have to open. Nathan's eyes were bright with something he was not going to call tears in a hospital hallway, and that was all right because Claire already knew what it was. Adler wants to start a formal rehab protocol tomorrow, he said. Good. She said the speech pathologist should come in by end of week. Also good. She said... He stopped, he looked down the hallway and then back at Claire. She said he might say my name. Not soon, not in the next week, maybe not the next month, but possibly. He let out a slow breath. I haven't heard his voice in 6 months. Claire said nothing. Some things don't need a response. They just need someone to stand next to them. After a moment, Nathan said, "Go in." He's awake. He's been asking not with words, but Adler said he kept looking at the door. She said she thought he was looking for someone. Claire looked at the door. She put her hand on it. She went in. The room was the same room she'd sat in for 4 hours the night before. Same monitor, same ventilator, same pale light, but it felt different in the way that a room feels different after something significant has happened in it, as if the air remembers. Eli Crow was awake. His eyes were open, and they were clear, not glassy the way they'd been at 4:52 a.m., not unfocused and drifting. Clear, present. The eyes of someone who is inside themselves and knows it, even if getting from inside to outside still has walls that need coming down. He found Claire immediately, the way he'd found Nathan, the way Adler said he'd found voices all day, with the quick, deliberate movement of someone who understands exactly what they're doing, even when their body can't yet confirm it. She pulled the chair close. She sat down. She didn't rush. "Hey," she said, "I came back. I told you I would." His eyes stayed on her face. "I know you probably can't say anything yet," she said. "That's okay. You don't have to. I'm just going to sit here for a while if that's all right with you." His right hand moved. It didn't lift. It didn't have that much yet. But it shifted, turning palm up on the bed. The same hand that had reached toward Nathan at 4:17 a.m., reaching again smaller toward Claire. She put her hand in his. His fingers curled. Slow, deliberate, the way they'd curled around Nathan's thumb, with effort and intention both. She held on. "You scared a lot of people," she said, keeping her voice easy, conversational. "The tone you use with someone when you want them to feel like everything is normal and the world is manageable and there is time. Including me. I'd been here 3 days. I was not planning on my first week being this eventful." The monitor showed agony. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. The precursor to a smile, the muscle memory of it, surfacing. "Your dad told me about the bridges," she said. "The kind people rely on without thinking about it. The kind that just work." She paused. "I think that's a good way to live, building things that hold." She looked at him steadily. "You're going to build them, Eli. I genuinely believe that." His hand tightened slightly on hers, slight but real, present and intentional and unmistakable. The monitor clicked up to 82. At 3:47 p.m., Halpern came back with the care team. 6 people, now including Dr. Solis and the speech pathologist Edler, had already contacted a woman named Rena, who came in carrying a bag in a warmth that filled the room differently than clinical authority. Rena sat across from Eli and introduced herself in a calm, clear voice, and then said, "I'm going to help you find your words again. It's going to take time, and it's going to be hard work. But you're already doing the hardest part, which is being here." Eli's eyes went to her when she spoke and stayed there. "Good eye contact," Rena said quietly, to no one in particular, and to everyone. Halpern stood at the foot of the bed and reviewed the chart and said nothing. And Claire watched him review it, watched him read the night's observations, as if memorizing them, as if building something into his practice that he intended to carry forward. The look on his face was not guilt anymore. It was something more productive than guilt. It was the look of a man deciding to be better. Dr. Solis caught Claire's eye across the room and gave her a single nod. Brief, honest, the kind that means more than a speech. At 4:15, the room gradually cleared, the care team filing out to make plans to write protocols to begin the long institutional process of reversing a conclusion and building a new one in its place. Rena left last, stopping at the door to tell Eli she'd be back in the morning, and Eli tracked her to the door. Nathan came back in. He looked at the now quieter room, at his son, at Claire, and he said, "They're talking about transfer to a rehabilitation facility in about 2 weeks if he continues to progress." "That's a good sign," Claire said. "That means they're planning for forward movement." "The hospital's attorney came to see me at 3, Nathan said, and his voice shifted, something careful moving into it. "They wanted to discuss the withdrawal order, the timeline, whether the family had interest in Nathan." Claire kept her voice even. "That's a conversation for another day." He looked at her. "You're right." He sat down. He put his hand on Eli's arm. "Another day." Eli's eyes moved to his father and stayed there, the same locked, deliberate gaze that had held at 4:52 a.m. but steadier now, more sustained, more him. And then at 4:23 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, 22 hours after a rookie nurse had stepped into a doorway and said 5 words that changed everything, Eli Crow opened his mouth. His throat worked. The muscles of his face contracted with effort. The ventilator still breathed its mechanical rhythm underneath the moment. But what happened was separate from the machine. It came from him, from somewhere inside him, from the part of him that had been listening and understanding and waiting for the road back to be long enough. He said, D, just that. One sound, broken, hoarse, 6 months of disuse in every rough edge of it, but shaped, intentional, and aimed directly at the man sitting beside him. Nathan's head came up like a man who has heard something he stopped believing he would ever hear again. D, Eli said again, and then with an effort that was visible in every muscle of his face, Dad. Not clean, not easy, 2 syllables that cost more than most sentences ever would, but complete, real. And in the room in the air between a father and a son who had spent 6 months on opposite sides of a wall that everyone had decided was permanent, those 2 syllables landed with the weight of everything that had been lost, in the full staggering weight of everything that had just been found. Nathan made no sound for 3 full seconds. Then he said, yeah. His voice was gone, all the general, all the command, all the 30 years of composure entirely gone. Yeah, son, I'm here. I'm right here. Eli's eyes stayed on his face. His hand found Nathan's hand. He didn't speak again. That one word had taken everything he had, and now he needed to rest inside it to let it be enough for now, because it was more than enough. It was enormous. It was the whole world compressed into a single syllable. Claire was standing near the door. She had been writing in the chart, and she stopped writing. She stood very still, and she let herself be in the room for this. Not the nurse taking notes, not the field medic running protocol, just a person who had spent a night fighting for a boy she didn't know and was now watching him speak his first word back into the world. She wrote it down anyway. She wrote 4:23 p.m. Patient produced first intentional vocalization. Word dad, directed at General Nathan Crow. Sustained eye contact maintained. Response purposeful and reproducible. She wrote it down and then she looked up and she let herself feel the full weight of it, not as a clinical outcome, not as a data point, but as what it actually was. A boy coming home, a father catching him, a night that almost ended differently. She thought about the 36 hours that had preceded this moment, the signed paperwork, the cold certainty, the door that had been almost closed. She thought about what Donna had said at 5 in the morning. You're the reason that boy is still being treated. She looked at Eli, at Nathan, at the monitor showing 84 beats per minute, steady and climbing a body, arguing back against every conclusion that had been written about it. She thought, no, he's the reason. He never stopped. She was the one who noticed, but he was the one who fought. 2 weeks later, Eli Crow was transferred to a rehabilitation facility 40 minutes from Blackstone. He could track voices across a room without effort. He could hold objects in both hands. He was working with Rena every day on language, and every day there were more words, slow, hard-won, each one its own small victory against the silence. His father drove the 40 minutes every morning and stayed until evening, and on the second Thursday after the transfer, Eli looked at him and said without prompting, without effort this time, "Tell me about the bridges." Nathan told him. He told him everything, the letter, the 400 readings, the uncle who cried, all of it. And Eli listened with the complete focused attention of someone who has learned that listening is not something to take for granted. Claire heard about it from Donna, who had heard from the transfer coordinator, who had heard from Nathan directly. She was in the middle of a night shift when she got the message. She read it standing at the nurse's station, and she read it twice, and then she set her phone down and went back to work, because there were other rooms and other patients and other charts that needed her. But she carried it with her through the rest of the shift, quietly, the way you carry something you don't want to put down, the way you carry the proof that looking again is always worth it. That signal exists inside the noise. If you're willing to sit still long enough to hear it, that the most important thing a person can do in a room where everyone has decided is to stand in the doorway and say, wait. Claire Bennett had been a nurse for 11 days when she stood in that doorway. She would be a nurse for the rest of her life. And she would never walk past a chart, a monitor, or a room without asking the question that had made all the difference on a Wednesday night in the ICU at Blackstone Medical Center. Not what does the data say, but what is the data missing? Because sometimes the data is missing a boy who wants to build bridges. And sometimes a rookie nurse with shaking hands and a gut full of something louder than doubt is the only one in the building listening closely enough to hear him.